President Donald Trump is taking moves right now that would reclassify the appointment and, let's say, jobs of some political appointees and employees. Now, look, basically what he's doing, he's removing civil service protections from a lot of government positions, making it easier for these federal workers to be fired by Donald Trump. And in a public statement, he said this will help him root out corruption and have the government, quote, run like a business. Meaning he's going to run it like The Apprentice, right? You're fired. Now, look, first off, on Trump's new plan with Schedule F, here's what he wrote on Truth Social. He said, following my day one executive order, the Office of Personnel Management will be issuing new civil service regulations for career government employees. Moving forward, career government employees working on policy matters will be classified as, quote, schedule policy/career, and will be held to the highest standards of conduct and performance. If these government workers refuse to advance the policy interests of the president or are engaging in corrupt behavior, they should no longer have a job. He said this is common sense and will allow the federal government to finally be run like a business. And then Trump said we must root out corruption and implement accountability in our federal workforce. Now, according to the fact sheet on this released by the White House, this is going to affect around 50,000 federal employees, which is approximately 2% of the federal workforce. And it notes that these employees will keep their competitive status and are not required to personally or politically support the president, but must faithfully implement the law and the administration's policies. Meaning, you can believe whatever you like, you can love the president, you can hate him, but you got to do your job. And if you're violating that and inhibiting the functions of the government, you can and possibly will be fired. Now, this is not the first time Trump has used Schedule F. You might remember he also did this during his first term as president. Here's some more details from Axios. It says, even before Trump officially launched his second presidential run, reports abounded that he planned to resurrect Schedule F during his second term. It says during his campaign, Trump vowed to slash the size of the deep state federal government and fire rogue bureaucrats and career politicians. You know, it's the new rule dubbed schedule policy/career. You can say it's technically a little different from Schedule F, but basically the same thing. Will reclassify many career civil servants as at-will employees, making them easier to remove from their posts. And it notes that this new rule will impact workers involved in policy making. Two White House officials familiar with the plan told Axios, and it says flashback. Weeks ahead of the 2020 presidential election, Trump issued an executive order known as Schedule F that would have reclassified tens of thousands of federal workers whose roles involved policy-making functions. You know, so the new category made it easier to fire federal employees in civil servant positions and career posts who were considered disloyal to the president. Another way of saying that they're not carrying out the role of their jobs and intentionally inhibiting the role of the president. And it notes that former President Biden rescinded the executive order after he took office. Trump just brought it back. Now, let's go a bit more into what Trump is saying here, though. Remember, during the 2024 campaign, the Project 2025 proposal from the Heritage Foundation was framed as being part of Trump's big plan. Now, both sides denied there was any involvement. Trump distanced himself from Project 2025, saying he didn't even read it. During a debate with Kamala Harris in the campaign trail, he said that I have nothing to do with Project 2025. This is a group of people that got together. They came up with some ideas, I guess some good, some bad, but it makes no difference. Trump said he didn't read it. It wasn't his plan, it was somebody else's. But look, that plan also noted how Donald Trump could potentially use Schedule F to fire around 50,000 federal government employees. And the proposal on that would have mainly taken aim at the so-called deep state, the mid-level bureaucrats, right? And the argument with this is basically this. Trump has been inhibited by individuals just basically refusing to carry out orders. During his first term in office, this was one of the bigger challenges he faced. He would say, hey, take this paper, bring it to this person. The person would take the paper and throw it in the trash. There were a lot of reports like that. He'd tell this agency, implement this policy. They would slow walk it. They would just choose to not do it. And Trump, even though he gave not be carried out or would be just massively slow walked. Trump now, for example, is dealing with some of this, where there are allegations that he's, for example, getting rid of DEI policies, and there are insiders within different government agencies who've been caught on like undercover cameras with Project Veritas or James O'Keefe Media, for example, and they've said in hidden camera discussions that they have just renamed certain policies in order to sidestep the office of the president, meaning that there's a lot of agencies and mid-level bureaucrats who are choosing to either slow walk the president or block the president using their roles. Now, there's two issues you have with that. One of them is, well, how do you hold these people accountable? The problem you have is a couple points. One, when it comes to government unions, it's very difficult, debatably impossible to fire. You have to have done something really, really bad to get fired. And even then, you're probably going to get a golden parachute and pensions and the whole other 9 yards. Typically, at the very worst, they'll just reassign you to something else. They normally don't fire them. The other side is the president typically does not have that power. And so the president, Trump would not have the ability to basically go after officials who are not listening to him, meaning there's no accountability, meaning there's no risk, meaning they can do these things without any kind of risk of pushback or whatever. And so the concern on the Trump is somewhat entrenched. And they argue that this is the only way they can take action to do this. Now, the other side would say, what do you mean the president is going to be firing people who don't listen to what he says? And they take this as effectively Trump, purging disloyal members of government. And, of course, with the interest of putting in people who will follow his orders. And some would argue that damages the, checks and balances. The issue is, of course, this is not checks and balances within the function of government. Checks and balances exist between the different branches of government and, of course, different elected roles, not just individuals choosing to not do something. But part of the challenge Trump faces also, government employees can just choose to not do this, basically. And we've seen this with reports of workers trying to get around his ban on DEI, just rename things, whatever else. New York Post had stories on this. Others have had reports on this as well. And this new policy seems to take direct aim at that whole issue. In Trump's statement, he writes, quote, "If these government workers refuse to advance the policy interests of the president or are engaging in corrupt behavior, they should no longer have a job." That's the exact quote from Trump. And he also said, quote, "We must root out corruption and implement accountability in our federal workforce." Another big issue here, of course, being if you don't do a good job in, for example, business, you're probably going to get fired. If you don't do a good job in government, nothing's going to happen to you, right? And so Trump, when he notes this, he notes the government should be run more like a business. That's a big deal. And again, one of the main differences with the business is if you refuse to listen to your boss, if you get a directive, if you're told, hey, go take this paper and deliver it to this person, and you just throw your paper in the trash, or you don't pull your own weight, the business can and probably will fire you. Now, the issue with a lot of government jobs is they can't fire you like that. And so you have people who can just choose to not deliver that paper. You can have people who slow walk the implementation of something. You can have people who, there were reports coming out saying that, removing a login function from a website, they're saying it's going to take 100 days because, these are government contractors, and the Doge department goes in and they do it in 3 hours. And so some things that shouldn't take a long time take a very long time. Some argue it's because, you're expected to kind of not rock the boat. You're expected to kind of sit there and help everybody else slow walk things because nobody wants to work that hard, right? Now, so Trump's use of Schedule F in this context, where it's now called, schedule policy/career, it changes the classification of certain government jobs. And by changing the classification, it makes it so the president would have the power to fire them. This is important. When the president comes into office, what does he do? Well, there are a lot of positions where the president is able to replace the people in those positions. This is why presidents come in with their whole cabinets ready to go, right? You have a lot of appointed positions. You have a lot that need to be cleared by Congress. The president comes in, purges all the people they don't want, like even some pretty high-level positions, very common for them to do this, and they put their own people in. Trump has effectively expanded that. He's made it so that even mid-level bureaucrats, even some normal government jobs are reclassified in such a way that they're effectively appointed positions, like to an extent, right? And so by changing the classification of many government jobs, he can get rid of them. And the argument with a lot of this has been that this is not so much the boots on the ground, like just the regular guys. A lot of this is the mid-level bureaucrats, the mid-level managers and such. Not the top levels so much, because a lot of times those are the ones they can remove. The guys in the middle. And those are typically your entrenched, iron rice bowl types that can never lose their jobs. Trump has made it so he can fire all of them if he wants to. Now look, already, some of these powers are currently in place. Now, among Trump's first moves as president, he signed an executive order that did reclassify many government employees as political hires. And basically, before he left office the first time around, Trump put Schedule F into place. This is not technically new. Now, when Biden came into office, he got rid of that. He revoked Trump's executive order. And then when Trump did his, day one orders, eliminating basically all of Biden's executive orders, Trump also got rid of that order from Biden that got rid of Schedule F. And so Trump, after having removed Biden's removal, is now putting the thing back in place. And that's what's happening right now. Now, since then, there have actually been a lot of lawsuits on this. They're trying to overturn Trump's abilities to use that government power to fire government employees. Some of those lawsuits are coming from, as you would imagine, unions, because the unions are typically the ones that protect the employees from this type of firing. But his new statement says, using the Schedule F / schedule policy career designation as a way to reclassify government employees, that seems like a new way to sidestep even the issue of the lawsuits. And this is also something else we've been seeing with Trump, and something big actually that hasn't really been talked about. As you may have noticed, many of Trump's orders are being blocked or at least stalled by lawsuits. One thing Trump has been doing with some of those orders is while the cases are going through, and keep in mind, Trump is on a time limit here. If he does not get a lot of what he wants to get done before the midterm elections, there's a chance, of course, that some people may vote in new members of Congress. Those new members of Congress will act to block the actions of Trump through Congress. And there's two sides with that. On one side, Trump knows that for his supporters, he needs to demonstrate action. He needs to show them, I'm doing what I said I would do. He needs to show them that things are changing, but also for the middle-of-the-road voters and even the other side, he needs to send a message that what I do is beneficial to you. The other side seems to believe if they can block Trump from doing that, then it looks like Trump is just causing chaos, it looks like he's not achieving anything, and it also looks like the policies he's putting into place are damaging rather than beneficial. And so the battle over stalling these different orders is meant, at least I believe, to make sure that Trump's policies do not have a beneficial effect to the average American, and at the very, very least, to ensure that they're not effective, to make sure they don't actually do anything, to make sure they don't go anywhere. And if they can stall that until the midterms, whoever perceives the government doing good things will vote for the side they believe is doing good. Democrats want the votes, Trump wants the votes, and a lot of that is going to be on how all these orders go. And so what Trump has been doing to get around the blockades effectively, the stalling tactics, the lawfare, some would say, or you could say just the attempts to stop him from undermining the government, he's actually creating additional executive orders on top of pre-existing executive orders in order to change the language in some of the laws that are being used as the basis of the lawsuits. Does that make sense? And so, for example, if they're blocking Trump using Schedule F, he's doing basically the same thing, but by creating a new type of designation, effectively doing the exact same thing, but to an extent closing some of the loopholes used as the basis of the lawsuits, but done in such a way where you can achieve effectively the same thing. And so through additional executive orders, he's sidestepping the lawsuits, which will allow him to do what he was trying to do in the first place while making it very difficult for these legal teams. And with this new classification, not technically Schedule F, but kind of the same thing, it looks like he's doing that to get around some of these lawsuits, and he probably will fire a lot of people with this. Now, Trump is also taking some very strong moves to try to remove key officials from their positions right now. And on this point, he's actually doing it to an extent. There's a fairly big purge going on. One example in the IRS, right? The agency, the head of that agency, several other top officials actually quit recently over a deal to share data on illegal immigrants. And that's big, by the way, since many illegal immigrants, people say, well, how can you not give representation to these people? How can you not let them vote in our elections? Because they pay taxes. And some people question, well, how can illegal immigrants pay taxes if they can't work in this country illegally, and you can't pay taxes unless you have a social security number? Well, that's been kind of a gray area policy to let them, pay taxes while not being arrested. There were things in place effectively to protect the ability of illegal immigrants to work and then pay taxes on their income while not risking being arrested while doing that. And you could argue that in some ways this makes sure that they're not getting paid under the table. It helps ensure they're not working as like slaves or something like that. It creates some degree of accountability. The other side might argue that you shouldn't be letting them work in the first place. You should be deporting them. This was the gray area issue. So the IRS, to an extent, was concealing that information from ICE, for example, making sure ICE, Immigration Enforcement, cannot access the data to identify illegal immigrants illegally working, paying taxes, fair enough, but they can't really go after them. Those days are now coming to an end with what Trump just did. And any of those individuals who are paying their taxes, well, their information can now be revealed to immigration authorities. Now, there are some arguments on this that, and again, you've had a lot of IRS officials now step down from that. One argument is there are some blockades, some legal issues in place when it comes to government agencies sharing private information of American citizens between departments. You could argue that violates your constitutional rights on, again, illegal searches and seizures. The other side is there's some technicalities within the law that lets them do that. Trump is using those technicalities in order to do this. And the other side is they're saying that there's massive Social Security fraud. There are people who've been getting social benefits, unemployment, disability, the whole 9 yards, who are illegal immigrants. And they're saying that because you have people working illegally, getting government funding illegally, getting Medicare and Medicaid illegally, that the only way to go after these individuals is if they get this information. And so, again, maybe a necessary evil, you could say, maybe something great, maybe something terrible when it comes to sharing private information. And the other side is, of course, the argument that this will dissuade people who've been working and paying taxes, even if illegally, from actually paying taxes, meaning you have to pay them under the table, right? Now, Trump is also talking about ways to potentially fire the head of the Federal Reserve. Another big firing he's looking at right now. The Hill reported that President Trump's top economic advisor told reporters Friday the White House is exploring how to fire the Federal Reserve Chair, Jerome Powell, despite the legal guardrails on his position. You can't normally do that. And it's that Kevin Hassett, chair of the White House National Economic Council, backed away from his previous concerns about Powell's firing and said the White House was looking for ways to replace the Fed chief. He said, quote, "The president and his team will continue to study if Powell can be fired," Hassett told reporters at the White House. And it notes that Trump's anger with Powell reignited this week after months of the president becoming increasingly critical of the Fed chief. Why is that, folks? Well, basically, here's where it's at. Trump has been engaged in a lot of public arguments with Jerome Powell because of the Federal Reserve's interest rates. Remember, a lot of this goes back to the Biden administration. It goes back to, COVID policies, because international shipping lockdowns. Remember when they were saying we were entering a state of stagnation, and inflation. The idea that not only is your dollar going to be worth less money, inflation, right? But in addition to inflation, you're dealing with effectively like a depression. You're dealing with higher costs of goods. So not only does everything cost more, but your money is worth less. And of course, the Fed was trying to offset effectively an economic downturn equivalent to or worse than the Great Depression. Meanwhile, while they were telling you this, they were also saying, don't worry, the economy is doing fantastic. Anybody who says otherwise is a dangerous conspiracy theorist. Now, Trump is suggesting that he's basically gotten us off that path that would have, the path of economic destruction. And through the use of tariffs, through other policies, through renegotiated trade deals, Trump has ensured the United States is not going to be facing that possible future. The other argument to this is that the U.S. dollar is the world reserve currency. And so what is good for the United States might not be good for everybody else who uses the U.S. dollar. Canada, for example, Mexico, for example, all of our other trading partners, and basically every country on the face of the earth that uses the U.S. dollar. And so the argument with that is, look, America's doing well, the rest of the world is not. If you mess with interest rates, mess with the U.S. dollar, you're going to mess up the whole world. And so these are the two battles taking place. The other big issue is that a lot of U.S. bonds are about to go onto the market. And some economic analysts suggest that if things are not changed, if the Federal Reserve does not move on this, if the dollar does not get devalued to an extent, the new bonds going onto the market could actually tank the U.S. economy. And some say this is basically a time bomb that Trump is facing. If he does not deal with this, it could destroy our economy. Good for the whole world, bad for the United States. So which one do you prefer? Now, Trump says that Powell should lower interest rates. Powell says he doesn't want to budge, basically. But the issue over the Federal Reserve is difficult, and here's why. The organization, the Federal Reserve, it's technically not a government agency. It's in kind of a gray area. It's kind of a private organization. It has some degree of federal government oversight to an extent. It was created in such a way that gives the government kind of some power but keeps it at arm's length. You do have pseudo-appointed positions, but it's supposed to be non-political. And the idea with it is this. It's to ensure that policies directly related to the value of the U.S. dollar and to interest rates cannot be interfered with for partisan ends. And so if the U.S. president wants to change something to make themselves look good for the next 4 years and maybe cause long-term economic damage after they leave office, they cannot do it. Because, again, messing with the Fed can change a lot of things. And the other argument is, well, a lot of presidents might not have the economic know-how to have that power, let's say. And so Trump and others are arguing the Federal Reserve. They're saying it's already acting in a partisan manner. Trump has alleged many times that the Federal Reserve has acted against Republicans and in favor of Democrats, pointing to the fact, for example, that when Obama was president, the Federal Reserve kept interest rates at basically zero for most of Obama's 2 terms in office. When Trump came into office, they raised interest rates. The argument of the Federal Reserve is that it's complicated. Basically, if your economy is doing well, they might raise interest rates to ensure the value of the dollar is not destabilized and it stays relatively the same. The counter argument to that is if the economy is doing very well, Americans will not feel it because the Federal Reserve will change the interest rates in such a way where the boat does not rock, let's say. The boat does not rock. And so you're going to be paying a lot more money on credit card debt or your housing payments or whatever else. And so even if your quality of life is better, you will not notice. your quality of life is going to remain relatively difficult because they maintain the interest rates. There are arguments for it, arguments against it. And so Trump now wanting them to lower interest rates, it would make the quality of life better for Americans. The argument is that it may not be good in the long term. And so that's the battle taking place. But look, in addition to the whole plans of mass firings of government employees, Trump also has another plan that's going into effect. He's looking to break up the concentration of federal employees in Washington, D.C. He's talking about draining the swamp, as he calls it. Washington, D.C., of course, being built on a swamp. Trump signed an executive order last week on this called Restoring Common Sense to Federal Office Space Management. And this will allow federal agencies to move their office spaces to areas outside of Washington, D.C. The idea is find cheaper buildings, more cost-efficient buildings, not those incredibly expensive historical buildings in Washington, D.C. Why are you paying, $1 million a month for something when you can rent a place in Idaho and it's going to cost you, I don't know, like $5,000 a month, something like that, right? That's the argument. And this is part of the Trump administration's other effort to reduce government waste, high government spending, and so on. This is the executive order. It says this: the American people are spread across more than 3.8 million square miles in urban, suburban, rural areas. To provide the highest quality service in an efficient and cost-effective manner, executive departments and agencies must be where the people are. And this is the other side of it. The idea that not only should you do this to reduce the costs, why do you have your office in the place where rent is exponentially high? Why don't you move it to a place where it's way, way cheaper? That's one side of it. The other argument is, if you're in Washington, D.C., and all the agencies are in Washington, D.C., and everybody who lives there is a worker there, the only people they're going to be friends with and rubbing elbows with are people like them. Why not move the agencies to different parts of America where the local areas are just your average Americans? The idea is to change the culture of the federal government. And this is a big thing, right? This executive order actually rescinds two previous long-standing executive actions from President Jimmy Carter back in 1978, and also from President Bill Clinton going back to 1996, that basically required the federal government to locate their office spaces in central business districts and even in historic properties within these CBDSs. However, according to Trump's order, these actions prevented agencies from relocating to lower-cost facilities and failed to adequately prioritize efficient and effective government services. And he says that revoking these orders will restore common sense to federal office space management by freeing agencies to select cost-effective facilities and focus on successfully carrying out their missions for American taxpayers. Now, again, arguments for this, arguments against it. One of the big arguments is that this will effectively disrupt what's known as the ivory tower, right? The ivory tower. And it's the idea that you have a disconnected elite. It includes your fancy college grads and your upper class society and the people working in Washington who are of a different class of people than most of America. And when you have people who criticize, flyover country, or criticize the heartland, people of this country and say they're a bunch of backwater hillbillies, and I'm not saying that's what some of them say. If you read what a lot of the big media say, they tend to look down on your average American. And some would say that is the disconnect caused by the culture of the ivory tower. Part of this would tear down the ivory tower. And part of the argument for that is it would integrate the government more in line with the culture and ways and thinking of the average American. The other side of it is that it would disrupt the expertise and circles of, groups within Washington, which do help move things forward. The question is that good or is it bad, right? Now, this was not entirely unexpected. Trump actually talked about this before. He had previously discussed his plans to change the culture of Washington when he was on the campaign trail talking about this. For example, he had previously discussed moving federal agencies to different parts of the country. And part of the idea would be to integrate government agencies into the normal culture of the United States and to eliminate what has become a federal government culture in Washington where social circles might be outside the whole system of connections. I'd say great, maybe move them to the East County in California. We can go ride some dune buggies and stuff like that. Not a bad thing. Show them the good time that Americans enjoy typically on the weekends, right? But like the other side of this would be to help eliminate deals and plans being made by people between government agencies, right? This is the other side of it. That in Washington, you have, of course, your government agencies, people who work in those agencies. If all the people around them are other employees of agencies or members of think tanks or lobbyist organizations, that creates a cycle where basically the entire social circles are people within a certain system. If you begin removing these agencies, it disperses that system and makes it harder for them to coordinate or whatever else. Now, there are arguments for this, arguments against it. Part of that would be it makes it hard for people to make plans and different plots maybe between agencies. Some would say, again, that type of information, of understanding the ways that other agencies work and what they're doing, would help inform them on how to make the government better. The other argument is that it forms cliques, it forms groups, it forms circles of people who may use that for good things and maybe bad things, right? And the idea of this would be to, again, change the entire culture. This would alter the federal government overall. This would fundamentally probably change our government if Trump does move forward with this, and it seems he's now moving forward with it. The question is, how long will it take? Now, another concept that's been floated as well with this move, it could also incentivize more government employees to quit their jobs voluntarily. Meaning, if they don't want to move to Idaho, if they don't want to move maybe to Greenland or to the 51st state of Canada, whenever that happens, they might have to quit their jobs, right? Given that not everybody would want to just up and leave. Some people don't necessarily want to move out of Washington. Some people don't necessarily want to move, out of state. Some people previously suggested that moving to like Middle America in their eyes would be like getting, exiled to Siberia. Not my words, there have actually been quotes like this. Not everybody would want to go to whichever state their agency would be sent to. And since they typically can't work from home anymore, right, you got to go to the office, they actually have to go there physically, right? Work from home has been eliminated except in very unique circumstances. And so if your agency gets moved to wherever they want to go, you got to go with them, right? I experienced this personally, actually. My dad, when I was a kid, used to work for a defense contractor, Teledyne Ryan. They used to do the fuselages for the Apache helicopters and the landing gear for like the C-130s and stuff. They also developed some of the original drones. And my dad was in the lab doing the drone work. And they closed shop. They went to the Mojave Desert and to Malaysia. And so, we had a choice. You want to keep your job, you have to move to the Mojave Desert or Malaysia. And we decided not to do it, right? So there are a lot of people faced with situations like that. And so look, with all this said, it's not necessarily smooth sailing for Trump's policies. He's still facing a lot of pushback on this. Even though he's taking actions that will change the way the government works, some really big things, there is still the question of whether or not he will be able to do it, right? Just because he makes an action does not mean it's going to go without challenges. And the Supreme Court right now, they're actually weighing some of these challenges, some of the big ones right now. The Supreme Court actually ordered a freeze on Trump's deportation plan. I'll be talking about this more after we come back from a quick break.
Experts agree. One of the best ways to protect against financial uncertainty is to diversify your portfolio. Learn how physical gold and silver can secure your retirement funds from today's economic challenges. With a gold IRA from American Hartford Gold, you can safeguard your wealth with no penalties or taxes when you transfer your current qualifying retirement accounts. Call now and our precious metals specialists will send you a free information kit, no cost or obligation. American Hartford Gold, a trusted industry leader with an A+ from the Better Business Bureau, has a 5-star rating from thousands of happy clients. Whether you are getting physical precious metals in a gold IRA or delivered to your doorstep, we offer only the highest quality gold and silver. For your peace of mind, we also offer a no-fee buyback commitment, a low-price guarantee, along with free shipping and free insurance. So don't wait. Call the number on your screen today and secure your financial future.
Welcome back. President Donald Trump is taking some big actions right now to change the fundamental way the government works. But he's not doing this without some challenges. Many have gone through, but a lot of what he's doing is getting blocked or delayed by lawsuits and other challenges, let's say. Among the latest is a brand new order against his plans for mass deportations. The U.S. Supreme Court Saturday morning issued a ruling that blocks, at least for the time being, the deportations of Venezuelans that were being held in bluebonnet detention centers in Texas. Fox News said this. It says the court's ruling comes after an emergency appeal from the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU, arguing that federal immigration authorities appear to be working to resume the removal of migrants from the U.S. under the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. And it says that SCOTUS, the Supreme Court, has previously said that the Trump administration could conduct deportations under the Alien Enemies Act as long as these suspected illegal immigrants are given due process to challenge their removal from the U.S. in its request for an injunction. The ACLU reportedly argued that the government's notice does not remotely comply with the Supreme Court's order, according to NPR. The argument on this being, look, how many people are there? 1 million, 2 million, 10 million, 20 million, and you want to give every single one of them the ability to go through the court and challenge it. Maybe in a few centuries we'll have the ability to hear every case in that. They're arguing effectively that because of the way that due process was basically thrown out in order to bring these people into the country, and due process is now being put in place to prevent them from being deported, you cannot have that in place to fix the problem that has been generated. The other argument is, well, if you're going to be deported to a prison in El Salvador, wouldn't you want to make sure that you can challenge it in court? It's a very difficult situation, in other words. The Supreme Court's going to have to hear this. It says here as well, the organization, the ACLU, also reportedly said that at a minimum, the notice needed to be translated into these other languages so that those being notified could understand, because not all of them speak English, of course. It says the Supreme Court urged the government to file a response to the ACLU's application, quote, as soon as possible, meaning the Supreme Court froze Trump's deportations, but they told him to file the challenge as soon as possible, effectively. Now, it's not clear how long this is going to hold for. The Supreme Court ruling, though, once they come out with one side or the other, this is not just going to apply to Texas. Supreme Court ruling, this could determine kind of once and for all whether or not Donald Trump can invoke the Alien Enemies Act. But more importantly, this could actually determine whether all these illegal immigrants need to go through an entire court process if Trump is going to deport any of them. If it turns out that every single illegal immigrant being deported from the United States has complete due process, it means that effectively you will never see the end of this. Not only will you probably never see the end of it, you'll probably see a lot of people try to illegally enter again, because what are you going to deport them in like 1,000 years? It'll never happen. The other side of it, of course, is that you should have due process to an extent. You can't just, again, send somebody somewhere without having the ability to have them challenge it. What if there's an accident? That's the other argument, right? Some argue also that Trump cannot invoke the Alien Enemies Act without the country being at war. Now, technically, this also works if Trump can prove the country is under invasion. And Trump is alleging that the country is under invasion by Venezuela and various gangs working with Venezuela. And just some of my take on this, Trump argues this is part of a war with the cartels and the gangs. Remember, Trump designated the cartels as terrorist organizations, many of the gangs as terrorist organizations. What has America been at war with since 9/11? We've been at war with terrorists. Now, you could argue the Alien Enemies Act was created at such a time where wars would have to be foreign wars. Does that apply to terror wars? That's another question they have to answer. Right? So does a war on a terror group count as a war that would let Trump go after individuals who may not be part of those gangs as well, who may be on the sidelines of it? Maybe they're assisting the gangs. Maybe they're giving material support to the gangs. Maybe they've worked with them, even in being trafficked. Depending on how broadly you interpret the standards on terrorism and working with terrorists, let me explain. If you get trafficked into the United States and a cartel was involved in the human trafficking operation, if you've been sent to a certain area and at some point during the trafficking of these individuals, a cartel or a gang played a role. I personally went to Panama, Darien Gap. I personally went to Mexico. I've personally visited some of these areas. I've spoken with a lot of people, including some of the groups running these organizations. Almost all of them will have at some point worked with the gang for human trafficking because that's the way the system is set up. Meaning every single one of these people has given some material aid because you have to pay the cartels. Every one of them has given some material aid to the cartels, for the most part. If you understand the legalities when it comes to aiding or abetting terrorism, when it comes to giving material support to terrorism, when it comes to working with them in any way, this would mean that any drug dealer, any person who has paid the terrorists, gang members, or cartels, any person who has worked with them, any person affiliated with them, could by extension be swept to an extent into the breadth of those laws. The challenge Trump has created by designating gangs and cartels as terrorist organizations, it creates the question of how broadly you interpret that. Meaning, this could effectively apply to every gang and every drug dealer and every person who paid a human trafficker ever in terms of the ability to deport them or go after them if Trump wants to invoke it to that extent. And this is going to create a lot of legal challenges because as far as I know, we've never really seen anything like this. Now, on that point as well, when it comes to the ACLU's argument that the Trump administration should have at least translated the orders into other languages so these individuals could read them and that would be part of their due process, the other side of it is that Trump signed an executive order making English the official language of the United States. And so the argument with that is the federal government is no longer legally required to provide government documents in other languages. Meaning, you could argue these people would not be able to read these documents. They can. Like, you can download Google Translate or something like that. You have the ability to do it now. You can do that. But they argue that it's not providing them with enough services to give proper due process. And that's the argument with that. Now, look, back on the legal argument throw, Trump has also pointed to Biden-era reports that connect the leadership of Venezuela and the government to the Cartel de los Soles. And this is the other issue that goes even beyond the terror designation. When it comes to Trump invoking the Alien Enemies Act, part of it could be we're at war. Trump says we're at war with the cartels. And again, the very large breadth of what that could encompass. The other side is you have to prove we're under invasion by a foreign country. Trump is saying that country is Venezuela. And the argument with that and how they relate to the cartels and the drug gangs and so on, and Tren de Aragua and basically every single Venezuelan immigrant by extension, is he's saying that the Venezuelan government is tied to the Cartel de los Soles. The interesting thing with this is that actually during the Biden administration, they even said that Nicolas Maduro, the president of Venezuela, is connected to the Cartel de los Soles. And so if the leaders of the government are tied in with that, a gang, and the government was in any way involved with the mass migration, quote unquote, an invasion, then by extension of the gangs, the cartels now designated as terrorists, this means the government was involved in coordinating that. Again, the Venezuelan government. And that's the basis of this that Trump is using, what he's invoking. Case in point, for example, a Department of Justice press release from March of 2020 during the Biden administration charges Nicolas Maduro with narco-terrorism. And it states that since at least 1999, Maduro and other Venezuelan officials, quote, acted as leaders and managers of the Cartel de los Soles, or Cartel of the Suns. And again, if you understand the chain of incidents with which they're using to declare an invasion, the government working with the cartels are terrorist organizations facilitating mass migration, meaning they're facilitating the invasion of the United States. That's the legal argument they're using. Now, look, also on this point, these connections with this, they're being used effectively to establish the ties between the gangs, the cartels, and the overall coordinated invasion of the United States. That's also what the Supreme Court is going to be hearing right now and trying to analyze. And look, even without the use of the Alien Enemies Act, Donald Trump would have a lot of authority to still deport these illegal immigrants. Again, the big issue right here is that the Supreme Court hearing this could impact not just this, but a lot of things. The biggest issue they could possibly rule on will be due process. Does every single illegal immigrant have to get due process, and to what extent do they have to have due process? Is that translating a document into Spanish or the many other languages of the people who came here? Or would that be giving them the entire breadth of legal rights, meaning you will never see an end to mass migration if that is determined. The Supreme Court is right now going to determine that. Now, another note, folks, the centerpiece of many of these arguments lately has been of what a man who was deported to El Salvador is being kind of the front line of this. A man was deported to El Salvador. It's alleged that he's a gang member, a member of MS-13. Some say he was sent there by accident. And the left has been referring to him as a Maryland man, just a man from Maryland in the United States, a father separated from his child and his wife. The right has been referring to him as a high-ranking member of the gang and terrorist organization MS-13. These are the two arguments. And there's a big argument now over whether this individual, Kilmar Abrego García, actually is a member of MS-13. In one of the latest pieces on this, President Donald Trump held up a photograph of the tattoos on Garcia's left hand. This is what Trump said alongside that image. Quote, Trump said, "This is the hand of the man that the Democrats feel should be brought back to the United States because he is such a fine and innocent person. They say he is not a member of MS-13, even though he's got MS-13 tattooed onto his knuckles." I'll explain that in a minute. And two highly respected courts found that he was a member of MS-13, beat up his wife, etc. Trump says, "I was elected to take out bad people out of the United States. Among other things, I must be allowed to do my job, make America great again." Now, on that point, you might have seen that some left-wing media, a lot of critics, they're saying that Trump actually doctored that image. Let me explain the context of that. The basis of the argument, saying that Trump photoshopped that, then there's a lot of media have reported this now. They're saying that the image Trump is holding up was altered to make it say MS-13. The basis of their argument is not that these symbols on the man's hand are doctored. There are a lot of other images of the guy's tattoos, right? The marijuana leaf, the skull, and so on. They're saying the image is doctored because it has MS-13 written above the images, and below are stated the names of the symbols, right? Now, anybody who's seen any kind of police analysis or police pictures, that's how they do those pictures. I would imagine that what Trump is holding up is actually one of the pictures the police created, one of the gang units, analyzing the tattoos. This is not to say that the symbols are photoshopped, which in a quick reading of a lot of the media articles, a lot of people might assume, which is why I believe a lot of those articles are actually kind of misleading in and of themselves. The photo Trump held up would be how a police unit focused on gangs would present that to a court. Anybody who's seen court documents, you would know the image he's showing is very much like how court documents are. And effectively what they're suggesting is this. These symbols, the marijuana leaf, the skull, and so on, are codes that represent MS-13. For example, the marijuana leaf is M for marijuana, M like the beginning of MS-13. The smiley face with the X's on its eyes is S. The cross and skull have other connotations for the 1 and 3. And so the connotations of the symbols spells out MS-13. And again, they're saying this was doctored. Now, on that point, it's not a secret this guy had those tattoos, though. There were some doctored images going around for the campaign to bring him back to the United States. On the other side, for example, some people who were trying to say, bring him back, they actually were covering up his tattoos with like hearts and things like that. The other issue is that when he was arrested, he had a lot of other gang paraphernalia, allegedly, things that would be used to connotate that. For example, he had a hat with the Chicago Bulls symbol, the bull on it, right? Now look, that does refer to a sports team. The other issue with that is a lot of Latino gangs actually use that to show gang affiliation. For example, if you are a member of Tren de Aragua, they'll always wear the Chicago Bulls hats. It's one of the symbols they use. MS-13 apparently does this as well, whether it's representing a bull or the devil, right? Because they do that. There's also been speculation over the lion tattoo on his arm. If you've seen some images, you might notice his tattoos have changed. Now, some suggest that the lion in the latest photos was a cover-up of another tattoo. I reached out to Oscar Ramirez. When I was in Panama, Oscar was one of the journalists I was working with there. Oscar is a Mexico-based correspondent for Real America's Voice. Oscar told me, quote, yeah, it looks like a cover-up and the first soldiers of the gang. And he said they usually tattoo in their hands and on their chest, so that's a cover-up, meaning some of the high-ranking members of these gangs will have tattoos in that area and on their chest, and he suggests it does look like a cover-up. Now, Senator Chris Van Hollen, a Democrat, traveled to El Salvador trying to get this guy back to the United States. You can see in the photo between the two of them, it does look like the tattoo on his arm has been changed. And it does suggest also there's either been a cover-up of an existing tattoo or he just got a new one, right? Maybe he likes lions or something like that, right? And that photo also with the senator went viral online because, well, it shows the tattoos on his fingers, the same one Trump held up, which many are saying represent MS-13, or code for it. Now, on the point of that senator, he and a lot of other Democrats have argued the man did not receive proper judicial procedure to justify sending him back to his country in El Salvador and sending him to a prison used to harbor gang members. Like, if you're going to send somebody to like forced labor in El Salvador, you got to have due process. That's the argument from the Democrats, right? For them, this is more about due process. Senator Chris Van Hollen wrote this. He said, I said my main goal of this trip was to meet with Kilmar. He said, tonight I had that chance. I had called his wife, Jennifer, to pass along his message of love. I look forward to providing a full update upon my return. Now, in response to these arguments, the Trump administration has published additional information on the allegations against the man. In particular, while that senator was visiting him, the Trump administration released a big report on his criminal history. This is the police affidavit from the man's arrest in March 2019, which had several allegations in the police document alleging he was a member of the MS-13 gang. This includes some things that are circumstantial, right? He was wearing clothing associated with a gang. There was a police assessment that he was in a gang. There was his unfortunate position of being arrested alongside two other MS-13 gang members. Now, you can argue whether you agree with this or not, but in the United States, there's something called guilty by association. If you are with somebody committing a crime, If you are with somebody who is in a gang and they commit a crime and they are arrested and you are with them, you can be arrested and charged with guilty by association. Now, some people agree with it, some don't, but it is an American law. And some say he was part of them, some say he was just there, unfortunately. There's also, as well, though, a confidential police informant who said the man is an active MS-13 gang member. This is all in that document. And, of course, also his alleged gang tattoos. And there are some recorded doubts about this, but 2 courts did take this evidence as being strong enough to say he was, in fact, a member of MS-13, which Trump has also been repeating over and over again, and his administration. White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt also went over the evidence during a briefing last week. This is what she said. Watch.
When Kilmar Abrego García was originally arrested, he was wearing a sweatshirt with rolls of money covering the ears, mouth, and eyes of presidents on various currency denominations. This is a known MS-13 gang symbol of hear no evil, speak no evil, see no evil. Abrego García was also arrested with 2 other well-known members of the vicious MS-13 gang. And 2 separate judges found that Abrego García was a member of MS-13, and that finding has never been disputed. And just this morning, it was revealed through Maryland court documents that Abrego García's wife petitioned for an order of protection against him for 2 instances of domestic violence in May of 2021. To set all of that aside, the basic fact that he was illegally inside our country and had a lawful deportation order made him subject to removal back to his home country of El Salvador. And if he ever ends up back in the United States, he would immediately be deported again. Nothing will change the fact that Abrego García will never be a Maryland father. He will never live in the United States of America again. And the United States Supreme Court ruled unanimously that the President of the United States and the Secretary of State could not be compelled to forcibly retrieve this citizen of El Salvador who is currently locked up in a maximum security prison in his home country due to his MS-13 membership.
Now look, on that point also, the president of El Salvador himself, Nayib Bukele, he told reporters during a recent visit to the White House he will not be returning the man to the United States. Watch this.
But I'm not releasing, we're not very fond of releasing terrorists into our country. We just turned the murder capital of the world to the safest country in the Western Hemisphere, and you want us to go back into the releasing criminals so we can go back to being the murder capital of the world? That's not going to happen.
Now, some are questioning, why is the president of El Salvador refusing to return this man? Is he working with Trump? Is he holding this man hostage? Well, this is the context of that. The guy is a citizen of El Salvador. He's not an American citizen. And in El Salvador, it's very illegal to be part of MS-13, to the extent that if you have an MS-13 tattoo, they can and have imprisoned people as MS-13 gang members. The standard that would qualify you as being designated a gang member can be something as little as a tattoo. This guy is alleged to have one of those tattoos. That is also now designated as a terrorist organization. And that means, of course, that if Nayib Bukele were to deport him to the United States, legally it would mean he would have to be trafficking a terrorist into America because of our laws on terrorism. He says he cannot do that. And also because the guy is a citizen of El Salvador, not the United States, American courts do not have authority over El Salvador. This guy is a citizen there. He's in his own country now, whether people agree with it or not. And so El Salvador has no legal obligation to deport him. They're saying they're not going to do it. Now, the White House also responded to some of the stories on Senator Holland's meeting with a gang member in El Salvador. Here's what they posted. They said, "Fixed it for you, New York Times. Oh, and by the way, Chris Van Hollen, he's not coming back." And folks, this is your White House. This is the official statement from the White House. They posted a photoshopped image of a New York Times front page. They changed wrongly to "who's never coming back," and they changed Maryland man to MS-13 illegal alien. That's your White House, folks. Now, that said, let me know in the comments what you think should happen to this guy. Should he stay there? Should he be brought back to the United States? Do you think that there should be, again, due process for every single illegal immigrant? How would you feel if you were deported and maybe you got swept up by accident? Would you want to have that representation? Now, folks, don't forget, hit the like button, leave some questions in the chat. Let's jump into some questions. And first off, folks, I'm sorry I did not abandon you all. I had to take care of some personal things last week. I know we didn't have shows on Thursday or Friday, so sorry about that. I had to take care of some personal things. And oh my gosh, this morning my car got towed. My car got towed this morning. I have to go pick it up later. Anyways, interesting weekend. Aside from that, I hope you all had a great Easter. I went down and visited my dad. We were hanging out with some family friends. Parked my car in the wrong place coming back. So what are you going to do? But I had a great Easter. I hope you all did as well. Let's see here. First question. M.N.A. Kinney, you're saying, as Rush would say, symbolism without substance. I believe you're referring to a good old Rush Limbaugh. Yeah. Actually, funny enough, I took a when I was in high school, we did a placement test of where you are politically, and when I was in high school, it said that I was the equivalent of Rush Limbaugh. Isn't that funny? On that point that you're saying, Rush Limbaugh would say symbolism without substance, and that is something actually. That is something actually. When you're dealing with gangs, they're not going to say things outright. If you ever have a friend or an unfortunate family member who makes some bad choices in his life, and you know how they work, if they're on the phone and they want to buy drugs, they're not going to say, "Hey, give me a pound of marijuana." They're going to say, "Hey, let me pick up a pizza," or something like that. How many slices would you like? About 5 grams of slices. They won't use direct language. They use coded language. It's the same thing with like gang tattoos. You're not going to tattoo on your body like the name of a gang, especially if you get sent back to El Salvador, and it's a country that will literally put you in prison probably for the rest of your life if you have MS-13 tattooed across your face, which they used to do. Right? Look at how many of those guys with MS-13 tattooed on their foreheads who are going to be, sitting in a cell hugging another guy from behind for the rest of their life, unless something changes. You're probably not going to get a tattoo that says that. So what do? You get things that have connotation, things that have symbolic meaning. Gangs almost always do that. They're not going to just state their crimes. Come on, who's going to do that? Some of them are stupid. Most of them are not that stupid. You know what I mean? And so a lot of them do that. Yeah, anyways, pizza can mean other things, right? Let's see here. Jerry, you're saying, as a vet, if I refused an order from a superior, I would be charged, then released. As a private employee, if I refuse, I get fired. Amazing, the Fed workers can refuse an order and get away with it. We need a civilian version of the US UCMJ for Fed employees. Yeah, there's a lot more to it. I know that if you're in a war, there are different, let's say you're in the military. You're a soldier, you're doing something else, and you refuse to follow orders. Now, there are some requirements where, you're allowed to question orders if you morally disagree with something. If your commanding officer says, "Hey, buddy, go take these civilians out back and, make sure that nobody ever sees them again." On the basis of morality, of personal belief, and the belief that they may be doing something illegal, that you're being told to carry out an illegal order, you can choose to not follow that out. There is a process by which you can challenge that. It's going to be a court process, and you're going to have to be a witness against your commanding officer. They asked me to do something I believed was immoral. They asked me to do something I believed was illegal. You do have the right to do that. I don't know if this standard is still in place, but if you tried that during World War II or even Vietnam, if you're in the middle of a battle, if you're getting shot at, your commanding officer says, I need you to go and rush to that corner, put suppressing fire on those guys, you move over there, we're going to pincer them, right? If you refuse, they would shoot you and they would kill you, because you cannot have that kind of insubordination during a life and death situation. That did happen. I don't know to what extent that is still legal. World War II, that was the standard. And you cannot, during life and death situation, combat, you don't disobey an order, right? The officer can and will kill you. And the thinking with that is that if one guy refuses, the next guy is going to refuse, and the next guy is going to refuse, and then you have insubordination, and then you lose the battle, and then you all die. Then everybody dies, right? So take that guy out. Human rights and other things, and good old American values. There are some standards now that do allow you to not carry out an order. But as Jerry is noting, there are some requirements in place where you can't just do that without some type of process. And so if you refuse a direct order from commanding officer, you're probably going to have to go to court. They will court-martial you for it. And there's more chance than not you're going to lose your job. You're going to be, kicked out of the military. Same thing with a job. If your CEO tells you to do something, you say, I don't think I'm going to do that. They'll say, I don't think you have a job anymore. Time to go learn to code, buddy. Actually, no, you can't do that either now, right? You're not going to have a job. Simple as that. If you're working in a business and you're working a construction job, your boss says, hey, go hammer some nails in that window. You'd be like, I don't feel like it. I'm not going to do it. He'd be like, well, I don't feel like paying you today. So I don't feel like paying you tomorrow either. So why don't you pack your bags and head out? Boom, you're fired. So why is it that those standards are in place? But if you're a federal government employee and they say, hey, deliver this document, hey, implement this order, and you're like, I don't feel like it. I don't believe in it. I'm not going to do it. They cannot fire you. They cannot have a review. And you can just do that. You can effectively block the function of government. And there's no repercussion for it. Should that be allowed? Should that be allowed, right? Now, that's where we're at right now in the U.S. To an extent that has been allowed. There are some exceptions to that. There is a process of review, like performance review to an extent, but it's very difficult to fire somebody for that. At worst, you might have your position changed, right? But it's even worse if it's the manager doing it. It's even worse if it's the head of a department doing it. Then effectively an individual ideologically motivated can kind of do whatever they want. And they can, to an extent where if you have that on a broad enough scale, they can undermine the function of the government and undermine the efficiency of the government. I do know people who've worked in government agencies, and I know people who've been told, quit working so hard, you're making us look bad, right? And unfortunately, I'm not saying they're all like this. I know a lot of them are not, but there are some people who are like that. And so there's different levels to that. And so what Trump is doing is kind of trying to change that culture. The other argument is, should the president be able to fire somebody who's being insubordinate? I don't know. It does give a lot more authority to the president. And the other argument is, look, it's Trump today. Tomorrow it's going to be somebody else, or maybe 8 years, maybe 12 years, we'll see. It's going to be somebody else. You might agree with them today. If you would disagree with them tomorrow, would you still support it? Would you want the next president to have the ability to effectively make the entire government function in line with what their ideology supports? The other big side of that, is that, one sec. The other big side of that is that some would argue that the DEI policies functioned as a way for Democrats to fire people who they did not like. Some would argue that a lot of, because it was, again, politically divisive, a lot of Democrats supported DEI and ESG, a lot of Republicans did not. Many Christians argued it was even discriminatory to force them to acknowledge those things, and many people believed that they were being fired or sent off to human resources, HR. HR wants to talk to you. And that if you were not ideologically aligned with what was a Democrat policy, you would be fired. And some argue that DEI was in place to work as a tool to fire people who did not politically agree with them, meaning that they kind of did that anyway, just they found a roundabout way of carrying it out, whether you agree that was the reason or not. It had that effect whether or not you agree that was the reason. It did have that effect, right? That's the other argument. Judy Akeem, you're saying, don't you have to steal someone's identity even to be able to pay taxes? So the IRS was concealing identity theft? Okay, so actually I found out more on this. Okay, so back to the point. This is on the story where you just had the head of one of the acting heads of the IRS and several top-level leaders of the IRS quit their jobs. And they're unhappy because, right, some of the private information of individuals is being made available to other departments, ICE in this case, meaning Immigration Customs Enforcement can now compare their data, and maybe even with the Social Security Office, and they can identify, because you're now working on data held by different agencies, it means that the Social Security Office can determine who these individuals were paying taxes, right? Because ICE is now part of that. They can say, this person was not a U.S. citizen, this person was not, meaning that they were working illegally in the country. Maybe they're saying this person even stole an identity, and we're doing that. The other side is they can even say this person was not a person. This was a fraudulent account, and because they're comparing data across agencies, they can purge the system. Now, this narrative is being used in a lot of different ways. Did any of you watch, Joe Biden actually gave a public speech last week. Joe Biden actually came out and gave a big public speech. He addressed the press. Most of his speech was about Social Security, and he was alleging that Americans are going to lose their Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. I've actually spoken to a lot of people who believe this. I've actually had some of you reach out to me and ask me whether this is true, and I looked into it, and here's the truth. So you might have heard, especially elderly people, who are saying, oh my gosh, Trump is going to take away my Social Security. Oh my gosh, Trump is going to cut Medicare and Medicaid. In terms of voting, there are a lot of people who now believe this. When Biden gave his speech, the basis of his speech was saying that. And so pretty much anybody who's reading, the big corporate media or like the left-wing media, they probably have at least heard that, if not believe it. This is what's actually going on. The Trump administration is purging the Social Security system. They're alleging you had people who were not people. You had fake names, you had fraudulent accounts, you had people who were 120 years old, some who were over 200 years old or something like that, who were getting Social Security. You had people who were kids getting Social Security. You had illegal immigrants who were given Social Security accounts, millions of them, who've now been identified. Now, you could argue those were legally given, and you could argue that Trump removing those people is going after Social Security. But the context is this. Trump is not eliminating Social Security, Medicare, or Medicaid for American citizens. He is removing them for illegal immigrants, fraudulent gangs, and they're alleging that 50% of the calls being made to Social Security are fraudulent, meaning there's foreign gangs stealing American money. And they're also arguing that Medicare and Medicaid was being given out massively to illegal immigrants. They are eliminating that. That does not mean American citizens are losing it. That is the gray area technicality of that argument. If you are an American citizen, you are not going to lose your Social Security. There is nothing saying that. There is no plans stating that. There is nothing saying that is going to happen. The only argument that could be used to even vaguely suggest that is this. Elon Musk and others have come out saying that they may cut the amount of money to Social Security. The context of that is if they eliminate the fraud, if they eliminate the ability for people to reuse one Social Security number multiple times, which was taking place, if they eliminate literally millions of people who were illegal immigrants receiving Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, disability, whatever else, you won't need as much money. You will cut, I don't even know how much money, I mean, billions at least, by doing that. And if you eliminate literally billions in fraud, which they've now identified, you don't need as much money. And so they're going to cut that. But they're alleging once they get rid of that, for American citizens, you will receive more money, not less. And so that is the issue that's being, in my opinion, misrepresented in a lot of the arguments. It's being deeply the facts and context are not being told to people. Those are the actual facts and the context of that. Now, if you're an illegal immigrant or you have a family member who is, they might lose their Social Security. You could argue those people are going to lose it. But that is the context, right? And that's what's being misrepresented. On Judy Akim's point, she's asking whether illegal immigrants have to steal someone's Social Security number to pay taxes. I thought that was the case. Now, that does happen. I've personally spoken to illegal immigrants who do that. In fact, when I used to live in Jackson Heights in Queens, I had people asking me, hey, how do I get directions to this place? And I had people tell me, oh, I want to get a job in construction in New York, but the job place tells me I need a Social Security number to get the job, and they gave me this address in Jersey City. I need to go there and get a Social Security number. And there are places set up where they do that. You basically, it's crazy. They have facilities set up for this. You get in line, and they have like just booths set up, basically, right? It's fraudulent. It's technically illegal, but they never get busted, meaning it's allowed to happen. They will sell you a fake Social Security number, and then they have a line where you can apply for all these other government programs. And so you get your fake Social Security number, you get your Medicare, you get your Medicaid, you get like everything else. They literally, and then even state level social benefits. They have facilities set up for illegal immigrants that do this. Now that used to be run by criminal organizations, but they were never busted. They were never punished for it. Now they even do that in the open. In my old neighborhood, in fact, I used to live off of I used to live off Junction Boulevard in Queens, which is around the area where they have a lot of open prostitution now and people selling stolen goods. That is where they've had reports of gang members selling stolen Social Security numbers literally on the street and selling fake IDs on the street. I used to live there, folks. I moved out when it got really bad during COVID. When they started bringing a lot of the illegal immigrants, the neighborhood got really bad. So that's when I left, but I used to live there. So I used to think that they all needed Social Security numbers. It turns out they don't just need that now. They can actually get a tax ID number even if they're illegal immigrants to legally work and pay taxes. And so you could argue there are good things to this and argue there are bad things to it. The good side is it means that we have, 10 million, 20 million illegal immigrants. It means they're not getting paid under the table. Obviously, a lot of them are going to work here. They pay taxes, right? You could argue, great, we get tax money from them. Some people argue since they pay taxes, they should also have political representation, which is the basis of the arguments of giving them voting rights. that's a bit of another issue, right? And the other side too, with them being able to pay taxes, is the IRS has to kind of conceal that to make sure people want to do that. Because if you're an illegal immigrant and you're being given the opportunity to pay taxes, you know, you might say, well, I don't want to get deported and arrested, and so why would I register for a tax ID to do that? They've created kind of a gray area where you're protected to do that. And again, maybe it's good they're paying taxes, they're not being enslaved, they're not getting paid under the table. It eliminates some of the issues you would have with that. It brings in some money for the government, meaning it does benefit the American system to an extent. But you've also given pseudo-legal status to an illegal action, right? That's the area it's created. And now, if the Trump administration can access that, what it means going forward, a lot of illegal immigrants are not going to want to do it, right? Because it means that they're going to be revealed and probably deported if they use this program. So they're probably not going to do it going forward, meaning they're not going to pay taxes going forward. And so that's the arguments with it, right? Again, whichever side you agree with on it. Another question, Ashley, but the point is, yeah, they actually can pay taxes and do that without needing a Social Security number because of the way that this was actually created, the tax ID number. Last question, Ashley from California, you're saying, isn't there a very old saying, absolute power corrupts absolutely? And I believe you're referring to the argument on whether, you know, Trump or whether the president should have the ability to basically fire anybody they want. That's the other side of the argument. People might agree with Trump. People might think that it's good that Trump can fire basically any official, any manager, any agency. Some might agree with that. The issue is, you're going to have another president one day. Would you want the next president to also have that power? You might not agree with the next president. Even if you agree with Trump now, you might not agree with the next president. Would you still want that power to be in existence? And the argument with that is it effectively consolidates a lot of power to the executive office. It gives a lot of power to the President of the United States. Do you want that? Right? That's the argument. Now, on Trump's side, he's saying, Trump, I believe he's saying that there's so much corruption that this is the only way he can do it. Now, in my eyes, this is like him. He's got the one ring. You know, he's got the ring of power, right? This is like Lord of the Rings. Will Trump throw that ring into the fires of Mordor when he's about to leave office? Will he get rid of these powers? Will he destroy it before he leaves office? Or will he say, no, it is my precious and I must keep it forever? Which is he going to do, right? Personally, I understand. In my eyes, I do believe that there are some issues that need to be repaired. I believe that, you know, you shouldn't have government employees not be able to just, you know, not carry out orders or not do their jobs. I think there should be some accountability. I believe they should be able to be fired if they're not doing their jobs or they're not doing their jobs well, right? I believe that. I also understand that there are some risks of consolidating power like that, and I understand both arguments. Is it worth the risk? Is the juice worth the squeeze? You tell me. But that is the issue with that, and those are the counter arguments to it, right? All right, folks. That said, thank you for being here. I went a bit longer today. I apologize I was not here last week. I had to take care of some personal stuff. Thank you so much for being here. Happy Monday. I got the day right this time. I hope you had a great weekend. I hope you had a great weekend, had a great Easter. Join me tomorrow, folks, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. Thank you so much as always. Please give this video a like. It does help us a lot. And that said, as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.